So let's get started. Before I begin, I wanted to give you guys an outline of what I'm going to be talking about. So first, I'm going to give you guys an anecdote on 2 bugs that I have found on a PDF decoder library called PDF Miner. And then second, I'm going to talk about what makes debugging hard for a large open source project. And third, I'm going to give you guys some tips, hopefully that would help you tackle a bug that you would probably find in a large open source project. All right, so my first tale begins when, so I was passing a 4-page PDF, and then when I found that it was only giving me the last 2 pages, which is kind of really weird, so my instinct with that was what is going on? So fast forward a couple months later, another bug that I found is that I was passing in this PDF, and then it just straight up raised an exception when it hits this particular library method. And this method, it calls unicar, and unicar is a built-in Python function that takes in an integer, and it returns the Unicode representation. So my, I found that bug, I was like, this is gonna be easy, because it has a stack trace, at least I've got something to go with. But that's not really the case, because what you find in a large project is that it's sort of think of it as a big an iceberg. And what's great about large open source projects is that it hides the implementation of it, so you don't have to care about what's really going on under the hood. But once you find a bug, now you have to peel layers of complexity, and you have to figure out hey, where is this really what's really going on here? And so most of us think of hey, we should ninja through the code, look at the code and figure out what the problem is. And that really kind of results in just going down the rabbit hole. And so what I would suggest is having a kind of a detective mindset. So instead of treating bugs, treat them as if they were a murder mystery. And so first is my second advice, that's my first advice. My second advice is to go through a list first. So what that means is have a checklist. Kind of do this maybe for 10 to 15 minutes. Just try to figure out hey, will this work? Will this work? Because then this kind of is gives you an idea maybe of hey, it was probably an operating system issue, or maybe it's some of the tests are weird. So my third advice is sort of understand how the problem came to be. So come up with a list of questions. So my case study for the first one is okay, so the problem is that it was only decoding the last 2 pages out of 4. So the question that you should keep in mind is how does the library actually read the page, right? So how does the PDF kind of structure, and where does it put how many pages this PDF is? And so from there, then you can, from that question, you can then go on to do some research, right? So you could probably look at some work text specification for that, or working paper, and then from there you can go through a debugging session and sort of start figuring out what the problem is and solve it. And so my last advice is sort of take a break. Don't kind of throw something in the wall and see what something sticks. Really think through of what the problem is. And yeah, good luck. Thanks.